A lot of you have been asking a few questions in relation to current events in shipping. First and foremost is what happens to the crew when the ship stays at anchor for an extended period? How do they replenish their supplies? Can they go ashore while the ship is at anchor and awaiting berthing prospects? And also, if the crew is not allowed to go home because of travel restrictions and have to stay on board even after their contract has already expired, do they still get paid? Or do they get a bonus for working over their contract duration? In this video, I will answer all of that. So, what happens to the crew when the ship stays at anchor for an extended period? A lot of you were probably wondering about this because of the container ship congestion in the port of LA, where at present, there are now around 100 ships waiting at the Anchorage area. Well, as I have previously mentioned in a few of my earlier videos, anytime that the ship stops its main engine for a long duration, either when in port or while at anchor, that's an opportunity to carry out maintenance. So, if the ship will stay at anchor for a good number of days, the crew will be very busy with a lot of the heavier maintenance jobs, which they normally can't do while the ship is running. Jobs like drawing out and cleaning the main engine pistons, painting the ship's hull over the side, or any work in high places, those kind of stuff. For container ships, this is actually a rare event under normal circumstances because the turnaround in ports is very fast, and in most cases, especially for smaller ships, container cargo operations only take a few hours to complete. So normally, container ships very rarely drop their anchor to await entry because container ports, again, normally are very efficient. So how do these ships replenish their supplies, particularly food supplies? Well, believe it or not, the answer to that is a little bit complicated. Obviously, supplies can be delivered by boat, and usually they are. But in some areas, this can be quite problematic. In the Anchorage area of Los Angeles, this can be easily done. Primarily because it's near the city and there are a lot of facilities in the area which actually offers this service. So for ships who drop anchor near cities, replenishing supplies shouldn't be a problem. Now, for ships that have ports of call in far-flung and almost uninhabited locations like small islands or near deserts or jungles or any place which is very far from cities, being stuck at anchor for an extended period will be very tricky. For food, ships normally store enough supplies good for a little over a month, and depending on the circumstances, this can be stretched to last a little bit more. In addition, if the spot that the ship is anchored at is good for fishing, the crew can spend their free time catching fish, both for fun and to supplement their provisions. Dami. Grabe. As you can see on our ship, some of us make use of our free time fishing. It is one of the few recreational activities we do on board whenever the opportunity comes. Yan. Of course, not all areas are good fishing spots. In some areas, you'll only get small fishes. In other areas, you can get lucky and catch big fishes. While in some areas, you won't be able to catch anything at all. Also, some countries, particularly the United States and Australia, and a few others, are very strict with fishing regulations and prohibit ship's crew from fishing activities within their territorial waters. But the real problem when ships stay at anchor for an extended period is water shortage. Ships produce fresh water either by desalination or by reverse osmosis, and this is done in the open sea when the ship is running and where the seawater is fairly clean. The water near land is not really suitable to be converted into fresh water since the risk of pollutants is very high. Now, the amount of fresh water stored on board the ship's tanks depends on the ship's size and operational requirements. In any case, 2 weeks or more of stoppage will definitely trigger the enforcement of water discipline or rationing in order to reduce the consumption and keep the systems running until such time that the water supply gets replenished. That means only small window periods for laundry, scheduled time for showers, that kind of stuff. In some ports, they have fresh water supply services available, so once alongside, the ship can replenish their water tanks. But in some ports, there are none, so in the latter case, the ship's crew has no choice but to see things through until the ship goes back to the open sea. Next question. Can the crew go ashore while the ship is at anchor awaiting berthing prospects? Well, it depends. Even before the pandemic, this was already a very tricky situation. In very few ports, and I mean very, very few, service boats are included in the port fees and run on a regular schedule, so the ships don't need to pay anything because port fees are paid for by the charterers. But in most cases, they cost extra and will have to be paid for by the ship. And of course, any extra expense that will be charged to the ship will have to be approved by the ship's managers in the office. In most companies, good luck with that. And that's before the pandemic. Now with COVID, there are a lot more reasons why shore leave while the ship is at anchor is unlikely to happen. Well, maybe it could, but based on my personal experience. And lastly, if the crew is not allowed to go home because of travel restrictions and have to stay on board even after their contract has already expired, do they still get paid? Or do they get a bonus for working over their contract duration? Yes, they still get paid continuously. Actually, seafarers' contracts of employment are quite flexible, to be honest. In the duration, there's usually a clause that provides for a plus or minus 1 month wiggle room. Generally because there's no way to predict where the ship will be exactly on the date that your contract ends. You can't demand to go home while the ship is in the middle of the ocean. You can't demand to go home while the ship is in a port which doesn't allow crew change. It just doesn't make any sense. In any case, while seafarers are still on board a ship, it is understood that they shall continue to work and continue to get paid until such time that they are signed off and returned to their point of hire. For example, I usually sign my contract in our office in Manila, but my salary doesn't start until I pass through immigration and get the departure stamp on my passport or seaman's book. So when I sign off from the ship and go home, my remaining salary will be computed until the time that I get the arrival stamp on my seaman's book when I pass through Philippine immigration. Now, if seafarers exceed their contract duration, do they get a bonus or an increase in salary? For most companies, unfortunately, no. The salary will be the same even if you've been on board for more than a year. However, there are a very few companies, and I mean very, very, very few, which give salary increase if seafarers stay beyond their contract. But for majority of companies, no. Most of them don't give incentives even if you go over contract. So I hope I gave clear answers to those questions. If you have any more, feel free to post it in the comments below. I do take time to read all of your comments, and if I have time or if it's convenient for me to do so, I do reply to a lot of them. Anyway, thanks for watching the video, and I hope you stay tuned for the next one.